They thought she was an easy target. It was a calculation born of arrogance and ignorance. In the middle of a crowded, chaotic cafeteria, a group of arrogant bullies decided to teach the quiet little black girl sitting alone a lesson. They dragged her, they struck her, and they laughed with the reckless abandon of those who believe the world belongs solely to them. But the moment her jacket ripped and a heavy, metallic object clattered to the floor, revealing her genuine federal agent's badge, every smirk vanished. Every heartbeat in the room seemed to stop, because they hadn't just beaten a helpless schoolgirl. They had attacked the daughter of a seasoned federal investigator, a man who would never forgive, and certainly never forget. The morning sun washed over Riverside High with a deceptive softness, casting a warm, golden light across the red brick walls, the rows of lockers, and the freshly painted hallways. But to a newcomer like Naira Evans, that brightness didn't feel welcoming. It felt like an interrogation spotlight she hadn't asked for. The moment she stepped through the front gates, the atmosphere shifted. Every conversation seemed to dip in volume, every pair of eyes flicked toward her, tracking her movements like a predator observing a new creature introduced into a hostile environment. Naira kept her shoulders tight, her books pressed protectively against her chest, her footsteps careful and silent, as if the concrete itself might judge her presence. Naira didn't want attention. Not today. Not ever. Especially not in an institution like this. Riverside High was renowned for two things: its award-winning basketball team and its ruthless social hierarchy. And no one embodied that hierarchy more than Logan Pierce. As the team captain and son of the school board's wealthiest donor, he was the self-appointed ruler of every hallway he walked through. That morning, he leaned against his locker as if he owned the very foundations of the building, surrounded by a sycophantic orbit of teammates and admirers. The moment Naira appeared at the far end of the corridor, Logan's eyes snapped toward her with unsettling precision. It wasn't curiosity that fueled his gaze. It was selection. It was the look of a predator locking onto a new, quiet target. Brent, one of Logan's closest lieutenants, followed his gaze and snorted under his breath. "New girl looks lost, or scared. Hard to tell," he muttered, loud enough for the surrounding students to pretend not to hear. He added a disparaging comment about her hair, something Naira heard clearly but pretended she didn't. She had been through enough schools to recognize that specific tone. It was the first spark of a fire she didn't want to see burn. Naira kept walking, chin down, breath steady. She recited a silent mantra to herself. Just get to class, just get through the day. But the hallway was narrowing. Students were closing in on her without physically moving, a psychological barrier forming. The air thickened with whispers and heavy stares, and then, as if on cue, Logan pushed himself off the locker and stepped directly into her path. He didn't smile. He didn't speak immediately. He just stood there, blocking her way with a lazy, terrifying confidence that suggested he had done this 1,000 times before and never once faced a consequence. Naira stopped. Her pulse jumped, thudding against her ribs, but her expression remained flat and unreadable. "Excuse me," she said softly, her voice steady despite the knot tightening in her stomach. Logan didn't budge. He tilted his head, examining her like a puzzle he had already decided he was going to dismantle. "You're the new transfer, right?" he asked, though the inflection made it clear it wasn't really a question. Brent laughed behind him. A few students slowed their pace, watching the scene unfold with the safe, detached distance of people who would rather witness cruelty than become victims of it. Naira tried to step to the side to bypass him. Logan mirrored her movement instantly, cutting her off again. A test, a warning, a silent message broadcasting clearly, "You don't walk freely here unless I say so." Her fingers tightened around her books until her knuckles turned white. The hallway buzzed with low murmurs, none of them supportive. Not a single person stepped forward. Not one. After a long, suffocating moment, Logan finally shifted back half an inch, just enough for her to pass. Just enough to pretend he wasn't actively threatening her. Naira walked by without looking up. her breathing shaky but controlled. She had survived worse, she had seen worse. Still, the weight of Logan's stare followed her down the hallway like a shadow she couldn't shake. And he wasn't finished. Not even close. No one knew that lunch that day would change the fate of the entire school. Logan's unsettling fixation didn't fade. It grew, festering and pulling him straight toward the cafeteria at noon, where everything would collapse in ways no one could undo. The cafeteria at Riverside High was always a cacophony at noon, an overwhelming mix of raucous laughter, clattering trays, scraping chairs, and the chaotic energy of hundreds of teenagers desperate to escape the classroom for 40 minutes. But when Naira Evans walked in, the noise felt sharper, as if every sound cut a little deeper than it should. She scanned the room quietly, searching for a sanctuary where she could simply disappear. She found a small table near the wall, far from the windows, far from the crowds, and, she hoped, far from trouble. Naira set down her tray, exhaled, and took the first peaceful moment of her day. Her lunch was simple: vegetables, rice, and a sandwich she had prepared that morning. It was comfort food. Familiar. Something she could control in a place that felt designed to break her. But peace was a fleeting luxury at Riverside High. Logan Pierce spotted her before she even lifted her fork. He nudged Brent with his elbow. "There she is," he said, his voice low and eager. Brent smirked. Mason raised his phone instantly, already anticipating the show. Tyler rolled his shoulders like he was warming up for a championship game. 5 seconds later, the group was moving toward Naira's table, slow, confident, and predatory. She didn't see them coming, but the unnatural silence that trailed in their wake gave them away. Logan approached from behind, leaning close enough that she felt the cold shadow of his presence fall across her meal. "Interesting lunch you got there," he said, his voice dripping with mock curiosity. "Did your mummy pack it, or is this some kind of cultural thing?" Brent snorted loud enough to draw attention from nearby tables. Mason already had his phone up, recording with that familiar, twisted expression bullies wear when they think the world is theirs to ruin. Naira clenched her jaw but didn't look up. She had learned long ago that reacting gave people like Logan exactly what they craved. She kept eating. She kept breathing. She stayed still. That stoicism irritated Logan even more. "Look at me when I talk to you," he ordered, grabbing the back of her chair and giving it a sharp jerk. Naira's body tensed, but she refused to give him the satisfaction of a frightened gasp. "Man, she's boring," Tyler chimed in. "Does she even talk?" Brent leaned forward, tapping her tray with his finger. "Maybe we should give her something more exciting to eat." And with one swift, unnecessary flick of his wrist, Logan shoved Naira's entire tray, food and all, across the table. Vegetables and rice splattered across the surface, dripping onto the floor like a scene choreographed for maximum humiliation. A collective gasp rippled through the cafeteria. Students turned, phones lifted, and whispers scattered like wildfire. But none of them intervened. None of them ever did. Naira froze. Not because of the food she had endured far worse days than this, but because the entire cafeteria was staring at her. They were waiting for her to break, waiting for her to react, waiting for her to give Logan and his crew the drama they were addicted to. She didn't. She held her ground, inhaled deeply, and blinked away the sting of humiliation. Mason zoomed in with his camera. "This is gold. She's not even fighting back." Logan smirked, leaning in close. He wanted fear. He wanted tears. He wanted the visceral satisfaction of dominating someone who refused to raise their voice. But all he found was silence. A silence that unnerved him more than he expected. What they didn't know was that Naira's silence was hiding something far more dangerous than any of them could imagine. And Logan, hungry for control, for ego, for dominance, wanted to push that limit just a little further, unaware that he was walking straight into a disaster. The center of the cafeteria was the worst place any student could be during lunchtime, too exposed, too loud, too crowded. But somehow, that was exactly where Naira Evans ended up. Logan's shove wasn't accidental, it was calculated, pushing her out of the shadows and straight into the spotlight of hundreds of watching eyes. Gasps rippled through the room. Chairs scraped against the linoleum. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Now everyone could see her. Now everyone could see them. Logan moved in front of her, with the arrogance of someone who had never been told no in his life. His hand clamped down on her shoulder, fingers digging through the fabric of her shirt. "You made a mess," he announced, loud enough for the whole room to hear. "Pick it up." Naira's heartbeat thundered in her ears, creating a deafening rhythm, but her face remained still, an unsettling calm that Logan mistook for weakness. "I'm not doing that," she said quietly. Her refusal only fueled the fire. "Oh, you're not?" Logan mocked, exaggerating her tone for the benefit of the crowd. He tightened his grip, forcing her to lean forward painfully. "I wasn't asking." Brent laughed. Somewhere behind him, Tyler crossed his arms, nodding in approval. Mason lifted the camera a little higher, framing the perfect scene of humiliation. Nearby, students exchanged nervous glances. Some looked horrified, a few looked away, pretending it wasn't happening, and a handful those who feared Logan more than they respected themselves smiled and whispered. But not one person stepped forward. Naira stayed seated, her back straight, her jaw clenched. "I'm not kneeling for you," she repeated, her voice steadier this time. Her words hung in the air like a spark hovering over a pool of gasoline. Logan snapped, his hand shoved downward, trying to force her onto her knees. Naira's feet scrambled against the floor as she resisted. Muscles locked in place. For a moment, it was a struggle, the quiet girl versus the school tyrant, but Logan had size and brute force on his side. With one harsh movement, he shoved her backward, sending her crashing into the chair. The impact rattled the metal legs and knocked her books onto the floor. Laughter erupted. Loud, cruel, a wave of sound that drowned out everything else. Some students winced, guilt flickering on their faces. A girl whispered, "We should help her." Her friend grabbed her arm and hissed, "Don't. Logan will come after you next." That was how power worked at Riverside High. You stayed silent, or you became a target. Logan stepped closer, towering over Naira like a shadow swallowing the light around her. "Pick it up," he repeated, each word punched out as a separate command. Mason zoomed in on Naira's face. "Come on," he taunted. "Cry for the camera. Give us something real." But Naira didn't cry, and that bothered Logan more than anything. Yet in all the chaos, all the noise, no one noticed the quiet figure standing near the far columns of the cafeteria, Ava Monroe. Her phone was raised, recording everything silently. Her eyes weren't wide with fear, they were sharp with intention. Ava wasn't just another student. She had seen Logan do this before she had seen the administration cover for him, protect him, reward him. She wasn't strong enough to step in physically, but she could record, and this time she would have proof. She zoomed in as Logan reached for Naira again. The slip that would change everything was only seconds away. With Logan's frustration now burning out of control, the bullying was about to turn into something far more violent. The cafeteria was roaring now, voices rising, chairs scraping, footsteps pounding. What started as humiliation had transformed into something far more malignant. Logan didn't want Naira to merely feel small. He wanted her broken, and he wanted an audience. "Get her up," he barked. Before Naira could react, Brent grabbed her arm. Tyler took the other. They yanked her out of the chair so violently her feet barely touched the ground. The room spun around her as they dragged her toward the left side of the cafeteria, toward the food lines, where the ceiling lights flickered ominously and the school cameras had conveniently stopped working weeks ago. Students knew that spot. That corner was where rules dissolved, where no adult ever looked closely, where Logan had dragged other students before, and today, it was Naira's turn. She managed to plant her feet for a second, but Logan shoved her forward, slamming her shoulder into the metal counter edge. Pain shot down her arm, sharp and immediate. She gasped, reaching instinctively to protect her head, but Logan was already behind her. "You don't get to ignore me," he snarled. His fingers twisted into her hair, tight, vicious, and unrelenting. He pulled. Naira's neck snapped backward with the force, her teeth clenching as she fought the instinct to scream. She raised her arms again, trying to shield herself, but Logan jerked harder, dragging her backward like she was nothing more than a rag doll. The crowd reacted instantly. Roars, cheers, whistles. It sounded less like a school lunchroom and more like a stadium crowd hungry for violence. Some students held their phones high, capturing the brutality. Others leaned forward for a better view, faces lit with the sick thrill of watching someone else fall apart. Mason circled them, his camera recording every angle. "Get closer. Pull harder," he called out, as if this were entertainment and not assault. Brent shoved Naira from the other side, sending her crashing into a cart of trays. The metal clatter echoed through the cafeteria like a warning bell that nobody listened to. Naira stumbled, disoriented, her vision blurring. She dropped to her knees, arms trembling as she tried to push herself back up. Logan didn't let her. He grabbed another fistful of her hair, ripping her upright again. "Look at me!" he demanded. She tried to twist away. He yanked harder. Her scalp burned, her eyes watered, but she still didn't scream, and that made him furious. Nearby, students chanted, as if encouraging a prize fight. "Hit her! Hit her again!" Some filmed, some laughed, some looked sickened, but remained too terrified to intervene. Through it all, Naira kept one arm wrapped over her head, fighting to protect the most vulnerable part of herself. Her breathing came fast, shaky, but she didn't crumble, not yet. And in the far distance beyond the crowd, past the flickering lights, Ava Monroe stood still, phone raised, recording once more. She had known exactly where Logan would take his victims. She had known the cameras didn't work. She had known no teacher would come. Because this had happened before, but never like this. Never with someone who wouldn't scream. Ava zoomed in. Her hand didn't shake. Her jaw clenched. She wasn't just recording anymore. She was waiting. Back by the counter, Logan tightened his grip, preparing another violent jerk. He wanted to see her break. Wanted to hear her cry. Wanted absolute control. But the universe had other plans. Because the next pull, harder, angrier, reckless, would unleash something he could never take back. Logan was seconds away from doing something even he couldn't imagine the consequences of, and that violent pull would send a crucial object flying out of Naira's pocket, one that would flip the entire cafeteria upside down. Logan had dragged Naira back toward the center of the cafeteria not by accident, but with dark purpose. He wanted the spotlight. He wanted every single person in that room to witness what happened next. The noise swelled around them like a storm, the crowd pressing inward, phones raised above heads, hungry for a moment they could replay, repost, and laugh at later. Naira's breath came in short, shaky bursts. She tried to twist away from Logan's grip, but he possessed both the strength and the fury to overpower her. His fingers wrapped around her hair once more, twisting cruelly until her scalp throbbed. "Get up," he ordered. She barely had time to straighten before he yanked her forward again, dragging her toward the nearest lunch table. Students scrambled back as he shoved plates aside and cleared space with one aggressive sweep of his arm. "You want to be quiet," he hissed. "Let's see how quiet you can stay now." Before anyone could react, before the crowd processed what was about to happen, before Naira could raise her arms to shield herself, Logan slammed her head down. The impact echoed through the cafeteria with a sickening metallic crack. A collective gasp swallowed the room. Food splattered across the table and smeared across her cheek, her forehead, her hair. Her body jerked from the force. Her hands flew up in instinctive panic. Pain exploded across her face, sharp, blinding, and immediate. But Logan wasn't done. With one hand still gripping her hair, he pressed down harder, forcing her face deeper into the mess on the tray. Spaghetti sauce smeared across her cheekbone. Mashed potatoes clung to her curls. A half-crushed bread roll stuck to her shirt. "Look at her!" Mason shouted, laughing from behind his camera. "This is insane! Keep going!" Tyler pumped his fist in the air. Students screamed not out of fear, but out of excitement, as if a violent spectacle had just become prime-time entertainment. "Hit her again!" someone yelled. "Don't let her get up!" another added. Naira struggled beneath Logan's grip, her palms flat on the table, trying desperately to lift her head, but his strength overpowered her. He shoved harder, knuckles whitening with the effort. Her breath came out muffled, suffocated by the food smeared across her mouth. Her vision blurred, her ears rang. All she could do was hold on to consciousness. Then the moment happened, the moment that would fracture everything. As Logan dragged her head back up for another slam, a small metallic object slipped from her pocket, knocked loose by the violent pull. It hit the floor with a sharp, unmistakable clang. The sound cut through the cafeteria noise like a blade. The object skidded across the tiles, spinning once, twice, before coming to a stop near Brent's sneaker. For the first time since the chaos began, the crowd fell silent. Brent frowned and bent down, reaching for it. The metal felt cold against his fingers. Cold and official. He turned it over, and over, and over, his face drained of color. "What is it?" Mason called out, still recording. Brent didn't answer immediately. He looked again, closer this time, slower, as if his eyes refused to believe what he was holding. Because this wasn't a keychain. It wasn't a trinket. It wasn't something a random girl would carry. It was a badge. Heavy, engraved, marked with a federal emblem he recognized from the news. A hush swept across the cafeteria like a wind blowing out every flame. Brent's throat tightened. His hand began to tremble. When Brent bent down to pick it up, his heartbeat almost stopped, because the moment the boys realized what that badge truly was, the entire cafeteria and their entire lives were about to flip upside down. For a moment, the cafeteria just seconds earlier, a roaring circus of violence, fueled by the adrenaline of a mob, fell into a silence so absolute, so complete, that it felt unnatural. It was as if the air had been sucked out of the room, leaving a vacuum where sound used to be. Phones lowered, hands trembling. The cruel laughter that had bounced off the tiled walls evaporated instantly. Even the buzzing of the overhead fluorescent lights seemed to grow louder, filling the void as every pair of eyes locked onto the small, unassuming metal object trembling in Brent's hand. He swallowed hard, his throat dry, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. The badge was heavy, heavier than it looked. It felt cold against his sweating palm, a physical weight that seemed to anchor him to a reality he didn't want to accept. It glinted under the harsh cafeteria lights, sharp edges, a polished gold surface that refused to be ignored, and bold, authoritative lettering stamped across the front in black enamel. FPI, Federal Protection and Investigation. It wasn't a prop from a drama class. It wasn't a plastic toy bought at a novelty store. It was a federal badge, a real one, the kind that carried the weight of the government behind it. The kind that belonged to the faceless figures students saw raiding corporate buildings on the evening news, or standing behind podiums announcing high-level arrests. The kind of object carried only by someone with authority far, far beyond the brick walls of Riverside High. Brent's voice cracked, sounding small and pathetic in the cavernous silence. Logan?" Logan, still gripping a fistful of Naira's hair, froze mid-motion. The adrenaline of the assault was still coursing through him, blinding him to the shift in the room's atmosphere. Confusion flickered across his face, a furrowed brow, a squint of the eyes followed quickly by irritation. It was the irritation of a king who had been interrupted during his coronation. How dared anyone stop the show? "What?" he snapped, not bothering to look down. Brent didn't throw the badge aside. He didn't pocket it to hide the evidence. He didn't laugh it off. He couldn't. His body was reacting to a primal warning signal. He simply held it up, higher and higher, until the light caught the emblem perfectly, displaying it for the entire cafeteria to see. Logan's expression shifted instantly. The arrogance drained away like water from a broken glass, replaced first by annoyance, and then, as his eyes focused on the metal shield, by a sharp, piercing alarm. "What is that supposed to be?" he muttered. But there was no confidence in his voice now. The swagger was gone. Only panic remained, thinly veiled as curiosity. Brent's breath hitched, his chest tightening. It's real, man. This is federal. Like, government-level clearance. Mason, who had been documenting every second of the torture with glee, zoomed in. On his high-definition screen, the details of the badge were undeniable. The serial number, the eagle, the engraving. When the FPI emblem filled his screen, he lowered the camera as if the device had suddenly become red-hot lava. "No way," he whispered, the color draining from his face. Tyler stepped back a full 2 feet, creating a physical distance between himself and the scene, as if proximity alone would implicate him. "Dude, we're dead." All around them, the paralysis spread. Students stared wide-eyed, mouths hanging open in disbelief. Chairs creaked as bodies instinctively leaned away from Logan, as though federal power could spill from that badge like radiation, scorching anyone foolish enough to be touching the wrong side of the moment. Logan swallowed hard. The sound was audible to those closest to him. His fingers, which had been twisted cruelly into Naira's hair, suddenly felt numb. He loosened his grip without meaning to, his muscles losing their resolve. His voice shook, barely a whisper. Whose is that?" And that was when it happened. That was the moment the axis of their world shifted. Naira lifted her head. She didn't move quickly. She moved slowly, deliberately, painfully. Her curls were stuck together with mashed potatoes and red sauce. Her cheek was rapidly swelling, turning a violent shade of red from the impact with the table. Her breathing was uneven, ragged gasps escaping her lips. But her eyes were not the eyes of a victim. They were not filled with tears. They were not pleading for mercy. They were colder than the deepest ice, devoid of emotion, stripped of fear. She stared straight into Logan's face without blinking, her gaze piercing through his bravado, dissecting his fear. No fear, no tremble, just a chilling, razor-sharp calm that made the fine hairs on the back of Logan's neck prickle with dread. It was the look of someone who knew the end of the story before the first page had even been turned. The cafeteria held its collective breath. The silence was deafening. Brent whispered, his voice trembling. It fell out of her pocket. Logan stumbled a half-step backward, his sneakers squeaking on the linoleum. No way. She's just some new girl. She's nobody. But she wasn't some new girl. And she certainly wasn't nobody. Ava Monroe, still half hidden behind a concrete pillar near the exit, felt a jolt of recognition that nearly made her drop her phone. She recognized that badge instantly, not from movies, but from memory, because she had seen the man it belonged to. She had seen him visiting the school once months ago, speaking to Principal Walsh in the main office. He hadn't been shouting, but the principal had looked terrified. Ava remembered the suit. She remembered the tone, a voice that made adults look like chastised children. And she remembered seeing that same badge clipped discreetly to his belt. Naira's father, Special Agent Cyrus Evans, a man known in federal circles for being as uncompromising as the law itself, a man who didn't negotiate. Ava's pulse raced as she continued to record, her fingers steady on the screen. They have no idea who they just touched, she thought, a mix of horror and vindication swirling in her chest. They have just signed their own death warrants. Naira raised a hand and wiped her face with the back of her sleeve, smearing the sauce further across her cheek but clearing her vision. She didn't reach for the badge. She didn't scramble to retrieve it. She didn't defend herself verbally. She simply kept staring at Logan like she was waiting for the clock to run out, waiting for the storm she knew was already on the horizon. Logan felt the physical weight of that stare, pressing down on him. He shook his head, denial warring with reality, his voice cracking for the first time. This doesn't mean anything," he said, but he didn't sound like he believed it. He sounded like a drowning man trying to convince the ocean not to swallow him. Then a ripple of whispers shook the cafeteria, starting low and building like a wave. "FPI. Her dad must be. Oh my God. Did you see the badge? That's federal property." It was no longer a fight. It was no longer entertainment. The spectacle was over. It was terror blooming in real time. Because with that badge came authority. With that badge came investigations, arrests, courtrooms, prison sentences, consequences. Everything Logan had never had to fear in his protected, privileged life. And something far worse than the law was coming. The owner of that badge was never far behind it. And the truly terrifying part was that he was already walking toward the cafeteria doors. A dark silhouette emerged in the doorway, broad shoulders blocking out the light from the hallway, a tailored black suit that absorbed the shadows, and an expression that promised the end of everything Logan thought he controlled. The double doors of the cafeteria didn't slam open. They burst inward with a controlled force, pushed by a hand that didn't know hesitation. But the sound of the doors hitting the wall wasn't what made the students turn. It was the sudden, drastic shift in the air pressure. It was a biological instinct, the collective herd sensing the arrival of a predator far more dangerous than the wolves they were used to. A tall man in a black suit, crisp, immaculate, and severe, stepped across the threshold. His presence hit the cafeteria like a physical shockwave. Special Agent Cyrus Evans, Naira's father. He didn't look like a parent coming to pick up a sick child. He looked like a tactical weapon in human form. He didn't shout. He didn't sprint. He didn't run toward the chaos screaming for answers. He simply walked. His stride was long, measured, and terrifyingly calm. Click, click, click. His dress shoes against the linoleum beat a steady rhythm that cut through the lingering whispers. And the school, hundreds of students who had cheered for blood moments ago, began moving out of his path without thinking. They parted like water around a stone, scrambling backward, chairs scraping violently against the floor, trays shaking in their hands. For the first time in the history of Riverside High, silence didn't come from shock. It came from primal fear. Cyrus's eyes were dark, unreadable pools that scanned the room with slow, mechanical precision. He wasn't looking at faces. He was assessing threats. He was categorizing targets. Each glance felt like a verdict being handed down. Students shifted nervously, unable to hold his gaze, looking at their feet, their hands, anywhere but at the man walking through their midst. He didn't look angry. That made it infinitely worse. Anger is hot. Anger burns out. This was cold. This was absolute zero. This was the calm of a man who knows exactly what he is capable of, and knows exactly what he is about to do. He took another step, then another, closing the distance to the center of the room. Logan's breath hitched in his throat, a strangled sound. His shoulders tensed, his pulse thundering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He didn't know who the man was, not officially, but something deep in his bones, some ancient survival instinct, told him he should run. He should bolt for the emergency exit and never look back. But he couldn't. His legs refused to move. He was paralyzed, pinned in place by the gravity of the situation, because Cyrus's gaze had finally landed on him. It wasn't a glare. It was an examination. Cyrus looked at Logan the way a scientist looks at a microbe under a microscope. Something small, insignificant, and dirty. And then, slowly, his gaze shifted to Naira. He saw the mashed potatoes smeared in her hair. He saw the angry red welt rising on her cheekbone. He saw the sauce staining her collar. He saw the slight tremor in her hands that she was fighting to suppress. He saw the shallow breathing of someone who had just been slammed chest first into a table. Cyrus didn't look confused. He didn't ask, "What happened?" He didn't blink in surprise. He knew. Everything he needed to know was written on his daughter's face. The narrative of the last 10 minutes was etched into her skin. He stopped right in front of her table. He was close enough now that Logan could smell the faint scent of expensive cologne and gun oil. Close enough that Logan could see the second badge, the one clipped subtly to Cyrus's belt, next to the outline of a holstered weapon beneath his jacket. Not school security, not local police, federal. Brent's knees buckled, and he had to grab a chair to stay upright. Mason lowered his phone immediately, hiding it behind his back. Tyler swallowed so loudly The students near him flinched. Cyrus took in the scene with a 360-degree glance, the food, dripping off the table's edge, onto the floor. The phones that had been recording, the students frozen mid-breath, and Logan still standing too close to Naira, guilt plastered across his pale, sweating face like a neon sign. When Cyrus spoke, his voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It carried perfectly in the dead silence. It was a baritone rumble that vibrated in the chests of everyone nearby. Who touched her? His tone was level, calm, almost gentle. But that softness was a lie. A thin veneer over a core of molten rage. Every student felt the weight behind it, a pressure that made the air too thick to breathe. It was a question that demanded an answer, yet dared anyone to speak. Logan stepped backward, his boots sliding in the mess he had created. I don't. We didn't. Cyrus raised a hand. One single, sharp motion. Not to strike, not to threaten, to silence. The cafeteria fell even quieter, if that were possible. The hum of the vending machines in the corner sounded like a roar. You will answer, Cyrus said, his eyes locking onto Logan's with terrifying clarity. Or I will find out myself. And if I have to find out myself, the outcome will be significantly less pleasant for you. No one moved. No one blinked. No one dared exhale, because that wasn't a father speaking to a bully. It was a storm being held back by a single thread. It was the entire weight of the federal government, focusing its lens on one terrified teenage boy. Naira opened her mouth to speak, perhaps to de-escalate, perhaps to explain. But Cyrus gently placed a hand on her shoulder, light, protective, grounding. It was a silent message. I am here. You are safe. I will handle this. She didn't flinch. For the first time that day, her shoulders dropped and her breath steadied. Logan's entire body trembled now. His hands shook uncontrollably at his sides, the smug confidence he flaunted all year, the armor of his father's money and his popularity, disintegrated under the weight of a single man's presence. Because Logan knew every instinct, screaming the man in front of him wasn't just a dad. He was an authority. He was a threat. He was a consequence. Logan's calculations changed instantly. This wasn't a fight he could win. This wasn't a game he could rig. Cyrus's voice wasn't loud, but it was enough to silence the entire cafeteria. And as the tension coiled tighter, winding up like a spring ready to snap, the first words of a confrontation that would break Riverside High open were about to be spoken. The cafeteria had transformed. It was no longer a place of lunch and gossip. It had become a courtroom, crowded, tense, suffocating. There was no judge, no jury, no wooden gavel, only a father standing in the center, radiating an authority that made even the teachers hovering by the walls shrink back into the shadows. Special Agent Cyrus Evans didn't pace. He didn't exhibit the nervous energy of a worried parent. He stood perfectly still, a monolith in the chaos, the badge on his belt gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights like an unblinking eye. He repeated the question that made everyone's blood run cold. Who put their hands on my daughter? His voice cut through the silence like a scalpel. Calm, controlled, deadly. It wasn't a request for information. It was a demand for a confession. No one answered. Dozens of students stared at the linoleum floor, studying the patterns of the tiles. Others stared at their black phone screens. Some glanced toward the doorway, as if expecting a fire alarm to save them. But no one looked directly at him. To meet his eyes felt dangerous, as if eye contact alone would count as an admission of guilt. Logan's breath became shallow, rapid little gasps that he couldn't control. His throat tightened, constricting as if an invisible hand were choking him. Sweat had already soaked the collar of his varsity jacket, making it cling uncomfortably to his neck. I didn't know one touched her, sir," Logan stammered, the words tumbling out in a disorganized mess. She fell. It was an accident." The lie was pathetic, weak, transparent. It hung in the air, insulting the intelligence of everyone in the room. Cyrus didn't even turn his head toward him immediately. He let the lie sit there, rotting in the silence. His gaze stayed forward, deep and steady, waiting for the truth like a shadow waits for sundown. Try again, Cyrus said quietly. A single bead of sweat trickled down Logan's cheek, tracing a path through his fear. Suddenly, a voice rose from the back of the crowd, not loud, not shaking, but clear and resolute. Actually, I have something. All heads turned in unison. Ava Monroe stepped forward from the back of the cafeteria. She held her phone out like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Her knuckles white. Her face was pale, drained of color, but her steps were steady. She looked at Naira first, a silent exchange of reassurance, then she turned to Cyrus. I recorded it, she said. And then she pressed play. The cafeteria filled with sound amplified by the acoustics of the room. The sound of Naira being yanked from her chair. Scrape, thud, the sound of Logan taunting her. Look at me when I talk to you. The sound of Brent laughing, cruel, hyena-like laughter. The sound of Mason cheering. Get closer. Pull harder. The sound of Tyler blocking anyone who tried to intervene. The video was damning. It was clear. It was undeniable. It wasn't just evidence. It was a weapon. Gasps rippled across the room. Whispers turned sharp and frantic. Teachers exchanged horrified glances. They had seen bullying before. They had looked the other way before, but never a scene like this. Never something captured with such brutal clarity. This couldn't be downplayed. This couldn't be erased. Logan stumbled backward as his own voice echoed from Ava's phone. That's out of context. She started, someone edited. But Ava didn't stop the clip. She let it play. She let it play through the moment Logan slammed Naira's head into the table. Crack. The sound of bone hitting metal made several students flinch physically. She let it play through the moment the badge fell from her pocket. CLang. Cyrus watched every second without blinking. His face was a mask of stone, but his eyes burned with a cold, terrifying intensity. When the video ended, the silence felt suffocating, heavy, oppressive. Finally, Cyrus turned his head just slightly toward Logan. The movement was slow, predatory. So you didn't touch her? He asked. His voice was still steady, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Logan opened his mouth, but nothing came out. His panic was visible now, spreading through every muscle, every twitch of his jaw. He was a trapped animal. A teacher stepped forward finally, Mr. Halpern, the lunch duty monitor. His voice wavered, cracking with nerves. Special Agent Evans, we should handle this through school protocol. We can take this to the office and discuss. Cyrus cut him off with a single, cold glance. He didn't even need to raise his voice. You had your chance to intervene, Cyrus said. You stood there and watched. You are no longer in charge of this situation. Mr. Halpern shrank back instantly, pressing himself against the wall as if trying to disappear into the paint. Then, Cyrus pulled out his own phone. It wasn't a standard smartphone. It was a thicker, ruggedized device. He tapped the screen a few times, his fingers moving with practiced speed. Within seconds, a secure federal database interface appeared, rows of names, reports, timestamps, biometric data. Students gasped softly. Teachers froze. This wasn't something anyone at Riverside was supposed to see. This was the dark side of the world, brought into their lunchroom. But Cyrus didn't hesitate. He scrolled until he found the names he wanted. The names associated with the faces he had just seen on the video. Then he read them aloud. Logan Pierce, Brent Carter, Mason Reed, Tyler Cook. Each name struck the cafeteria like a hammer blow. It sounded less like a list and more like a death toll. Under each name on Cyrus's screen were multiple incident files, vandalism, harassment, battery, complaints from students that had mysteriously gone missing, all of it carefully hidden by school administration to protect the star basketball team. But nothing is ever truly deleted, not when the FPI is looking. Cyrus lifted his eyes at last, locking eyes with Logan. These reports, he said calmly, should have been handled years ago. Logan felt the ground tilt beneath him. The room spun. No, please don't. But Cyrus wasn't listening to excuses. He wasn't listening to apologies. He wasn't even angry anymore. His expression was colder than anger. It was judgment. The truth was only beginning to unravel. And now, it wasn't just the boys who had something to fear, it was the entire institution. Principal Henry Walsh's office was a monument to his own ego. It was designed to intimidate polished mahogany wood shelves, lined with glittering trophies, framed certificates hung with excessive pride, and a massive oak desk that separated him from everyone else like a fortress wall. It was a room meant to project authority, power, and absolute control. But this morning, that illusion shattered the moment Special Agent Cyrus Evans stepped inside. Walsh looked up from behind his desk, startled by the intrusion. His rehearsed, diplomatic smile, the one he used for angry parents and donors, faltered instantly. It died on his lips the moment he saw Naira's bruised cheek, the sauce on her shirt, and the icy, homicidal calm on Cyrus's face. Agent Evans," Walsh stammered, rising halfway from his leather chair. His hands fluttered nervously over his paperwork. "I was just about to contact you. There's been a little, misunderstanding today. Kids can be unpredictable. You know how high spirits can—" Cyrus walked forward and placed something on the desk. Clink. A small metallic sound that echoed like a gunshot in the quiet office. The FPI badge. Walsh stopped breathing. His eyes bulged. The badge didn't just sit there, it accused the entire room. Its presence drained all color from Walsh's face, leaving him looking gray and sickly. His attempt at a smile collapsed completely, replaced by a tremor crawling up his jawline. Cyrus didn't sit in the guest chair. He didn't blink. He didn't waste words on pleasantries. "Explain," he said. One word, a command. Walsh swallowed. Hard. He tugged at his tie, which suddenly felt like a noose. "Well, you see, these incidents, they're usually blown out of proportion. Teenagers get into quarrels, things escalate, testosterone and all that, but it's nothing we can't resolve with internal discipline and guidance. We don't want to overreact and ruin young futures over a scuffle." Cyrus raised a hand. Walsh fell silent immediately, his mouth snapping shut with an audible click. "A misunderstanding?" Cyrus's voice was calm, but the calmness was deadly. It was the eye of the hurricane. "You're calling what I saw in that cafeteria a gang assault on a federal agent's daughter a misunderstanding?" Walsh fumbled for a reply, sweating profusely now. "Agent Evans, I assure you, Riverside High is committed to student safety. We have zero-tolerance policies in place." Cyrus leaned forward, placing both hands on the desk, looming over the principal. "Then why?" he asked quietly, leaning in until Walsh could see the flecks of gold in his furious eyes. "Do all the previous reports filed against Logan Pierce and his friends not appear in your disciplinary system?" Walsh's mouth opened, moving silently like a fish out of water. No sound came out. A teacher, Mr. Halpern, who had followed them in, stood nervously against the wall, wringing his hands until his knuckles turned white. Sweat glistened across his forehead. He'd been silent the entire time, praying to a god he hadn't spoken to in years that Cyrus wouldn't look his way. But Cyrus already knew. He knew everything. "Multiple complaints," Cyrus continued, his voice relentless, "submitted by students who were ignored. Red flags from junior teachers dismissed. Incident reports mysteriously deleted from the server. Security cameras conveniently malfunctioning during every single attack involving the basketball team." Walsh's legs buckled. He sat down hard. The leather chair groaned under his weight. "That isn't oversight," Cyrus said, each word sharpened like a blade, slicing through Walsh's defenses. "That is negligence. That is complicity. And that is intentional concealment of criminal activity." Walsh forced a shaky, desperate laugh. "Well, surely, Agent Evans. We can't assume anything without a thorough review. Maybe there were clerical errors. The system is old. Glitches happen. Open your disciplinary database," Cyrus ordered. Walsh froze. Now. With trembling fingers, Walsh reached for his mouse. He unlocked his computer, the screen illuminating his pale, terrified face. Cyrus stepped around the desk, invading Walsh's personal space, standing directly behind him. He watched every movement, ensuring nothing could be altered. Nothing could be hidden in a recycle bin. Full access, Cyrus demanded. All years. No filters. Show me the administrative logs. Walsh hesitated, his finger hovering over the mouse, but he felt Cyrus's presence behind him like a looming executioner. A single look from Cyrus forced compliance. He clicked. The files loaded, and everything Cyrus already knew became painfully, visibly undeniable. Rows of red text, deleted reports, edited timestamps, entries marked as resolved when no action had been taken, medical reports scanned and then buried in obscure subfolders, patterns of violence all traced to the same group of students: Logan, Brent, Mason, Tyler, and at the bottom of every dismissal, every cover-up, was Principal Walsh's digital signature, approving the action. Mr. Halpern let out a tiny, involuntary gasp before slapping a hand over his mouth. Cyrus's voice dropped to a cold whisper right next to Walsh's ear. Riverside High isn't just failing its students. You've been protecting the predators. Walsh's hands shook so violently he had to grip the edge of his desk to stop them. Agent Evans, please. You don't have to escalate this. Think of the school's reputation. We can fix this quietly. We can make a deal. Cyrus stepped back, looking at Walsh with pure disgust. Riverside High, he said, no longer has anywhere to hide. Walsh's breath caught in his throat. It was over. The empire he had built on silence and basketball trophies was crumbling, and the moment Cyrus sent the files to his agency with a single tap of his phone, the FPI began to move, fast, precise, and unstoppable. The investigation began faster than anyone at Riverside High could comprehend. It was a blitzkrieg of bureaucracy and law enforcement. Within an hour of Cyrus's call, the rumble of heavy engines filled the parking lot. Unmarked black SUVs, moving in a convoy, rolled past the school buses. Agents in Navy windbreakers, emblazoned with yellow letters FPI, Federal Protection and Investigation, stepped out. They carried tablets, sealed evidence cases, and the kind of calm, professional authority that meant something serious, something irreversible, had happened. The hallways, once loud and chaotic, with the sounds of changing classes, now felt like a containment zone. The chatter died down. Students whispered in clusters, eyes wide. Teachers clutched their clipboards with trembling hands, looking pale. Even the air itself seemed to thicken under the weight of the federal presence. This wasn't a school incident anymore. It wasn't a detention matter. It was a federal probe. Inside the main office, the nerve center of the school, rows of computers were being commandeered. FPI tech agents, specialists in cyber forensics, sat at the secretaries' desks. They weren't asking for passwords. They were bypassing them. They were deleting nothing, but copying everything. Every keystroke was logged. Every deleted file was restored from the backup servers. Every camera feed was recovered, even the ones Principal Walsh thought were permanently lost to technical glitches. Outside classrooms, agents approached students one by one. They didn't drag them out. They politely asked them to step into the hallway. Did you witness any part of the incident? What have you seen in the past? Has this group targeted you before? They weren't intimidating to the victims. They didn't need to be. Their badges did all the talking. They offered a safety that the teachers never had. Meanwhile, in the cafeteria, the very heart of the chaos, forensic agents examined the scene with meticulous detail. They measured the distance from the tables to the wall. They checked the lighting angles to verify the video footage. They analyzed skid marks on the floor, food splatter patterns on the walls, and the direction of the impact. Students watched through the glass doors with wide eyes, realizing the gravity of what had occurred. What seemed like just bullying an hour ago now looked horrifying under the fluorescent truth of federal scrutiny. It looked like a crime scene. Logan Pierce felt the walls closing in. The school, once his kingdom, was now his cage. Everywhere he turned, an agent was either talking to someone he'd heard in the past or retrieving files he didn't know still existed. His teammates avoided his eyes, walking past him as if he were invisible. His friends, the inner circle, were falling apart. Brent, Mason, and Tyler stood in a corner of the locker room, keeping their distance from Logan. They were whispering frantically, their loyalty evaporating in the face of fear. "Dude, this is your fault!" Brent hissed, his face red. "You're the one who slammed her," Tyler shoved him back. "You filmed it, idiot. You gave them the evidence." Mason shook his head, his voice cracking with tears. "We're screwed. We are completely screwed. They weren't wrong." FPI agents soon gathered everyone in the auditorium, an emergency assembly. All students were required to sit. The room buzzed nervously, a hive of anxiety. A large screen on the stage, usually used for pep rallies, now displayed restored disciplinary files, time-stamped footage, and recovered reports that students had filed but were ignored or erased. A hush fell over the room as testimony after testimony was read or given. A sophomore girl stood trembling at the microphone, clutching a tissue. "They pushed me down the stairs last year," she sobbed. "I broke my ankle. The nurse told me I was clumsy. No one did anything." A freshman boy whispered into the mic. "Logan threatened to break my arm if I told the counselor about the money he took." Another student added, voice shaking with anger. "We all knew. Everyone knew. But the school protected them because they won championships." Every word was recorded. Every confession added to a growing storm. Principal Walsh sat stiffly in the front row, his face ghost-pale, sweat collecting at his temples. He looked small. He looked defeated. He knew this wasn't something he could smooth over with paperwork or excuses. "Not anymore," a teacher muttered under her breath to a colleague. "This is going to end his career. Maybe more." A question emerged among the students, rippling through the rows. How long has this been happening? How many victims were silenced? How deep did the corruption go? The answer came when the lead investigator, a woman with sharp eyes and a sharper demeanor, stepped forward to the podium. "For years," she said, her voice steady and amplified by the speakers, "Riverside High administration has knowingly concealed acts of violence and harassment committed by specific students, prioritizing athletic reputation over student safety." The room erupted into shocked whispers. The truth, naked and ugly, was finally out. Logan felt physically sick. He put his head in his hands. Then came the line that would echo through the school for years. "The incident in the cafeteria is no longer considered an isolated event. It is now evidence of a long-term pattern of abuse, cover-ups, and criminal negligence." The silence afterward was devastating. A simple lunchtime altercation had erupted into a national storm. And now, the consequences long overdue, heavy, and unavoidable were finally about to crash down on the boys who started it and the adults who let them get away with it. The disciplinary room at Riverside High had never felt so small. It was a sterile box, 4 cold metal chairs, 1 long table, and a single overhead light that hummed with a cold, flickering buzz. It was a room designed to make you feel isolated, and right now, it was working perfectly. Logan, Brent, Tyler, and Mason sat in a row. They were no longer a unified front. They were no longer the swaggering kings of the hallways. Their varsity jackets were gone, confiscated as evidence. Their confidence had evaporated. Their audience had vanished. And their future was slipping through their fingers like dry sand. The FPI reports lay on the table in thick manila folders, each one labeled with a name that now felt like a threat rather than a title. Logan Pierce, Brent Carter, Tyler Cook, Mason Reed. A federal agent stood at the front of the room. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't lecturing. He was reading the list of consequences with the chilling neutrality of a surgeon announcing a terminal diagnosis. "For your roles in the assault of Naira Evans," the agent announced, looking at each of them in turn, "you will each face immediate school suspension pending a formal expulsion review. In addition, because this case involves federal implications, your names will be entered into the juvenile criminal system for assault, harassment, and participation in organized group violence." A sharp, strangled gasp escaped Mason before he could stop it. Brent shook his head violently. his face pale. No, no, you can't. This was just school stuff. It was a prank. The agent didn't flinch. School violence is still violence. Tyler's voice cracked, high and desperate. We didn't mean this wasn't supposed to get this big. We didn't know who she was. It got this big because you made it this big. The agent replied coldly. Ignorance of the victim's identity is not a defense for brutality. Logan sat rigidly, his jaw clenched so tight his teeth threatened to crack. Fury and panic warred inside him, twisting his expression into something ugly and desperate. This isn't fair, he snapped, slamming a fist onto his knee. None of this is fair. You're all acting like I'm some criminal. She made us look bad. She provoked us. She wouldn't listen. Brent slammed his hands on the table, turning on his leader. Oh, shut up, Logan. Look what you got us into. Tyler rounded on him, eyes wild. He's the one who slammed her. He's the one who wanted to show off for the cafeteria. Mason jabbed a trembling finger toward Logan. You said the cameras were broken. You said nothing would happen. You said your dad owned the board, and you idiots went along with it. Logan fired back, his voice rising to a shout. You could have walked away. You were laughing. You were filming. Their voices overlapped, rising into a chaotic storm of accusations. Friendships that had seemed unbreakable an hour ago were unraveling in real time. They weren't a team. They never were. They were just four scared boys scrambling to survive the wreckage they had created. Brent pointed at Logan again, tears of rage in his eyes. You were the one who chose her. You were the one who kept pushing. We just followed you. Yeah? Logan snarled. And you enjoyed every second of it. Tyler stood up so quickly, his chair slammed into the wall with a deafening crash. We trusted you, man. You said your dad would cover for us. Where is he now? Huh? Where is he? Silence. Logan's confidence evaporated. He looked at the empty doorway. His father wasn't coming. No one was coming. For the first time, the truth hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. They had always relied on privilege, family, money, school favoritism, protected status on the basketball team. But none of that mattered in the face of federal authority. Their empire had been built on fear and lies. Now it was collapsing under the weight of the truth. The agent closed each folder with a crisp, final snap. Your parents have been notified. You will all be escorted out of the school premises once the paperwork is complete. Brent buried his face in his hands, sobbing. Mason stared blankly at the wall, seeing his scholarship dreams dissolve. Tyler paced in small circles, muttering to himself like a madman. And Logan looked at the table, breathing hard, realizations settling like ice in his chest. They weren't untouchable. They weren't powerful. They weren't hunters. They thought they were the predators, but they had been the prey all along. And while the boys faced the cold reality of their cruelty, outside on the lawn, Naira and her father were about to face something far more personal, the truth between them. The sun was sinking behind the sharp silhouette of the school buildings, casting long, golden shadows across the courtyard. The noise of the investigation, the sirens, the shouting, the chaos had faded into distant echoes, replaced by a quiet stillness that felt heavier than the noise before it. Students lingered at the windows on the upper floors, whispering, watching, wondering, but Naira Evans stood alone on the edge of the lawn, her arms wrapped tight around herself, her breathing uneven. The bruises along her jaw were starting to darken into a painful purple, and dried streaks of food still clung to her shirt. She wiped at her face again, but no matter how hard she tried, the humiliation wouldn't disappear with a simple swipe of her sleeve. Footsteps approached, slowly, measured, deliberate. Cyrus Evans stopped beside her. The rigid, terrifying authority he had displayed inside the school was gone, replaced by something softer, something infinitely heavier. Naira, he said quietly. She didn't turn. Her throat tightened, a lump forming that made it hard to swallow. You weren't supposed to come. Cyrus's jaw clenched just slightly. I came because I needed to. A tear slid down her cheek, glistening in the fading light. I didn't want you to see me like that. I didn't want all of this. Her voice cracked, fracturing under the weight of her shame. I didn't want you to get involved." Cyrus exhaled slowly, a sound full of buried pain. He stepped closer, speaking in the language that grounded them both, the language of their home. "Kong Kong Sai," he said gently. "You are not wrong. You were never wrong, Naira. The only ones at fault are the people who think they have the right to hurt others." Naira shook her head, staring at the grass. "This isn't the first time," she whispered. The confession hung in the air. "It wasn't just today." Cyrus's eyes sharpened. He stood very still. She finally turned toward him, and when she met his gaze, the dam broke. "At my old school, it was the same." Tears spilled faster now, hot and angry. "They called me names, followed me in the hall, laughed at my hair, took pictures, posted them." Her shoulders shook as she wiped her nose with the back of her hand, the composure she had held all day finally shattering. "I told teachers. They didn't do anything. They said I was being dramatic, that I should ignore it." Cyrus's breath grew heavier, deeper, as if every word she spoke carved a physical wound into him. "They shoved me in the locker room once," she continued, the words tumbling out. "Another time they threw my backpack into the rubbish bin. Someone put gum in my hair. I had to cut it off. That's why I changed my hair, Dad." Cyrus's fists tightened at his sides so hard his knuckles turned bone white. Naira looked away, her voice trembling. "I didn't tell you because I knew you'd get involved. I knew you would do this, and then everything would become worse." Cyrus stepped closer, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "Worse than being hurt? Worse than being silent?" His voice softened, but carried an edge of steel. "You must not endure this alone. You should not. And you will never have to again." Her breath hitched. More tears escaped, falling onto the ground between them. Cyrus knelt in front of her, so they were eye level. He forced her to look at him. "Listen to me," he said, calm but unbreakable. "I am not here because you made a mistake. I am here because I let the world believe it could touch you without consequence. That ends today." Naira covered her face with both hands, sobbing quietly, releasing years of held-back pain. Cyrus rose slowly, looking toward the school building with a gaze both fierce and determined. The sun caught the edge of his badge, reflecting a small but powerful glint. Cyrus knew exactly what he had to do next, and the decision he made in that moment would change the future of Riverside High forever. The main conference hall of Riverside High had never held this much tension. Normally, it was a place for boring parent meetings, award ceremonies, or dull administrative sessions. But today, it felt like a courtroom that was about to rewrite the history of the entire district. Members of the school board sat stiffly around a long, polished mahogany table. Their suits were immaculate, but their expressions betrayed deep unease. Pages of printed reports lay scattered before them, evidence, testimonies, timestamps, proof of years of negligence that could no longer be buried. Across from them stood the team of FPI agents, serious and composed, their presence a stark reminder that this was no longer an internal school matter. At the center of them all stood Special Agent Cyrus Evans, calm but radiating an authority that filled every corner of the room. Principal Walsh, the disgraced administrator, sat off to the side. His complexion was gray, his hands trembling as he avoided eye contact with everyone. Cyrus placed a thick, black folder on the table. The sound echoed in the silence. "This is the complete record of misconduct, cover-ups, and administrative failure at Riverside High," he began. His tone wasn't loud, but the force behind it was undeniable. "Today, we are here to ensure this school never harms another child through silence." A board member cleared her throat nervously, adjusting her glasses. "Agent Evans, we understand the situation is serious, but surely some matters can be handled internally." "No," Cyrus interrupted. The word was a wall. "Not anymore." An FPI agent stepped forward with a tablet, projecting data onto the wall. "Our investigation found that multiple complaints were deleted. Camera systems were intentionally left in disrepair, in blind spots, and staff members were pressured to overlook violent behavior from specific students to protect athletic standings. Walsh winced as if struck physically. Cyrus continued, his voice relentless. Riverside High failed to protect its students. Therefore, I am requesting immediate structural reform. He listed the demands one by one, pacing slowly. First, a complete overhaul of the disciplinary system. No more favoritism. No more erasures. Every complaint must be logged, reviewed, and archived federally. The board exchanged alarmed glances. This was oversight on a level they had never imagined. Second, mandatory anti-racism and anti-bullying training for all staff and students, quarterly, not annually. And it will be conducted by external specialists, not your gym teachers. Third, installation of new security cameras monitored by an external agency to prevent tampering. The board members scribbled notes with frantic urgency, realizing they had no bargaining power. And lastly, Cyrus said, turning his gaze slowly toward Walsh, leadership changes. Walsh flinched. Cyrus continued, Principal Walsh is to be suspended effective immediately, pending an investigation for negligence and obstruction of justice. One agent stepped behind Walsh, placing a gentle but firm hand on his shoulder. Walsh didn't resist. He simply lowered his head, defeated. The empire of silence he had built had crumbled. A board member hesitated. And who will lead the school now? Cyrus slid another folder across the table. A candidate with a history of integrity and zero tolerance for discrimination. Someone from outside the district to avoid conflicts of interest. We have already vetted her. The board opened the file. Their eyes widened. Yes, one whispered, reading the credentials. This could work. The vote was unanimous. Riverside High had a new principal. What followed was a long moment of silence, not of fear, but of realization. The school would never be the same. Not after this. Cyrus folded his arms behind his back. Riverside High, he said quietly, is no longer the place it used to be. It was over. Riverside High would never return to its old, rotten ways. And with the dust beginning to settle, it was time for Naira to return to the school she had unknowingly transformed. The cafeteria looked different now. Not because the tables had moved or the lunch menu had changed, but because the air itself felt new, lighter, cleaner, as if someone had wiped away a layer of grime and darkness that had clung to the room for years. Just inside the entrance, brand new security cameras blinked steadily from the walls, clear. Sharp lenses with red LEDs indicating they were active. They saw everything. They missed nothing. A quiet, constant reminder that silence would no longer protect cruelty here. And into this transformed space walked Naira Evans. Her steps were gentle but steady, her chin lifted, not in arrogance, but in a quiet, newfound strength. The cafeteria, once a battlefield where she had been hunted, had become a place where she could finally breathe. Whispers spread the moment students noticed her, but they weren't the same whispers as before. Is that her? She's back. She looks different, stronger. She really changed everything. The tone wasn't mocking. It wasn't cruel. It was respectful, even reverent. Slowly, almost magically, tables parted like ripples in water, making space for her to walk through. Not out of fear, but out of something Riverside High had never offered her before recognition. Naira reached a table near the center, the very spot where her world had been shattered days ago. Her hands hesitated for a second before she sat. Memories flickered, painful, vivid images of food and laughter, but they no longer owned her. She owned this space now. Someone approached from her right, Ava Monroe. She didn't ask for permission. She sat quietly beside Naira, sliding her backpack onto the seat with casual confidence, as though it had always been her place to sit there. Ava offered a small smile. Mind if I join you? Naira exhaled softly, the last bit of tension in her shoulders easing. I'd like that. For a moment, they simply sat together. No chaos, no shouting, just the low hum of a cafeteria learning how to exist without fear. Then, something unexpected happened. A group of students, 3 juniors and a sophomore, approached the table hesitantly. Their faces were nervous, almost embarrassed. They shifted their weight from foot to foot. "Hi," one of the juniors said, rubbing the back of his neck awkwardly. We wanted to apologize for not stepping in that day." Another added, looking at her shoes. "We saw everything, and we froze. We shouldn't have." Naira looked at them for a long moment, her expression soft but unreadable. She didn't say, "It's okay," because it wasn't okay. She didn't absolve them of their guilt. That was theirs to carry. But she nodded gently, a gesture of acknowledgement. "You're not the only ones who wish you'd done more," Ava added quietly, glancing around at the hundreds of students who had watched in silence. The group left with grateful looks, and others soon followed, some offering small nods, some quiet thanks, others just meeting Naira's eyes with something resembling remorse. For the first time since stepping into Riverside High, Naira felt seen, not as a target, not as a victim, but as a presence, a force. She took a slow sip of her water, absorbing the moment fully. She didn't need to raise her voice. She didn't need to announce herself. She didn't need to prove anything. Naira realized her strength had never come from shouting, but from simply existing, unbroken, when the world tried to crush her. And now, with the school transformed and the truth laid bare, the final chapter of her journey was ready to be written. The last light of the day spilled across the school courtyard, turning the pavement gold and stretching the shadows thin and long. Riverside High, once loud, chaotic, and quietly cruel, felt almost peaceful now, as if the building itself was exhaling after years of holding its toxic breath. On the far edge of the lawn, Naira Evans stood with her father. The bruises on her skin were fading, yellowing at the edges, but the strength in her posture was unmistakably new. She watched students heading home in small groups, their conversations low, cautious, changed. Everything looked familiar, but nothing felt the same. Beside her, Special Agent Cyrus Evans stood quietly. His black suit reflected the dying sunlight, but his presence remained as steady and solid as a mountain. He had been many things in his life: agent, investigator, enforcer, but in this moment, under the soft glow of dusk, he was only a father. For a long while, they simply watched the campus. The wind rustled through the trees. Leaves drifted across the walkway. Students glanced over occasionally, not with fear, but with a new kind of respect for the girl who had turned their school upside down. Cyrus finally broke the silence. "No one has the right to touch you," he said, his voice low but firm. "Not now. Not ever." Naira inhaled slowly, tasting the cool evening air. The words sank deeper than he knew. She wasn't the same girl who walked into Riverside High alone that morning. She wasn't the girl who bowed her head, who stayed small, who survived in silence. She had found something in herself she didn't know. She had a quiet power that didn't need validation to exist. "I know," she replied softly. And she did. Cyrus looked at her, studying her face the way only a parent could, seeing both the pain she'd endured and the resilience that had risen from it like a phoenix. "I'm proud of you," he said. Naira blinked, a small, genuine smile forming. "I didn't feel strong." "You were," he answered immediately. "Strength isn't loud, Naira. It isn't always about winning the fight. Sometimes, strength is just refusing to disappear when they want you to." She let that settle inside her heart. Across the campus, she saw Ava leaving the building, waving before heading down the sidewalk. Teachers spoke in hushed tones near the car park, their eyes carrying the weight of a school forced to confront its own failures. Workers were installing the final security cameras near the gym. A banner advertising the new zero-tolerance program fluttered near the entrance. Riverside High was changing, and somehow, impossibly, she had been the catalyst. Naira wrapped her arms around herself, not out of fear, but from grounding, from recognition, from knowing that what happened to her would never happen there again. Cyrus rested a hand gently on her back. "The school will remember this day. They'll remember you." She nodded. Her voice came quietly, but it held the weight of everything she'd endured. "I just wanted it to stop," she said. I didn't want revenge. I just wanted it to stop. Sometimes, Cyrus replied, looking at the horizon. The world only stops when someone makes it. They stood there together, father and daughter, as the last students disappeared through the gates and the sun dipped below the horizon, bringing the end to a day that would last forever in their memories. Naira took one final look at the school, the hallways where she'd been stared at, the cafeteria where she'd been humiliated, the lawn where she now stood, unbroken. Never underestimate a girl just because she's quiet. Silence, sometimes, is the final warning for those who choose cruelty. And just like that, the entire school learned a lesson they would never forget. Power isn't always loud, and justice doesn't always walk in with a warning. Naira didn't need to fight back physically. Her truth, her strength, and the badge that fell at the perfect moment did it for her. And when her father stepped in, every lie, every cover-up, every bully finally faced the consequences they thought they'd outrun forever. What would you have done if you witnessed this moment in the cafeteria? Would you have stood up or stayed silent? Tell me in the comments below. And if this story shook you even a little, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories just like this.